Yeah, I know. Well, because you said just need to take the pill with the vitamin C so that it absorbs, and then it's like you had everything else, and it's sugar free, so it's like, oh man. Yeah.
Check.
I like the watermelon and guava. That's kind of, I've been kind of missing it.
You good, Zach? Oh, yeah. Hey guys, welcome to your first contract with Jenn Marr.
Hello.
Let's give her a little welcome. Yes. So for this entire workshop, if you're going to say anything, ask a question, please make sure we get a microphone to you so that it can be in the workshop recording. That way, if you're listening back, you'll have this in crystal clear audio. And that's pretty much it.
All right. Well, let's just get started. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here on the incredibly sexy topic of contracts. And especially for being here during rush hour, on a weekday. Thank you for being here. My name is Jenn Marr, and I'm here to go over how to release music and get paid doing it. Very quickly, I will share a bit about my background. I was originally born in Northern California, but I quickly moved abroad to Shanghai in China when I was in elementary school. Spent my whole life out there, came out here to USC for university as an undergrad, and that's kind of where my journey began. I was an international relations, global business major. I thought I was going to be a diplomat. Unfortunately, I started raving and also became a basshead. So, on paper, I was a straight A policy student. In real life, all I cared about was the wubs. I went straight through to Harvard Law School, and it was actually not until then that I decided to combine both of my passions and really dedicate myself to advocating for the artist community. I ran a club called the Recording Artist Project, which also, similar to IO, would offer workshops and, just resources for the artist community. I spent some time working at Sony before transitioning back here to LA. I worked then in corporate mergers and acquisitions. And then, I ended up going out on my own. This whole time I was throwing warehouse parties. I was actually an underground bass music DJ. I was managing. I was an agent with Surefire. And all of that came together to land me where I am now at Myman Greenspan. And we are a premier boutique talent-side law firm focused purely on music transactions, which is gobbledygook for we help navigate artists through their career, everything as boring as, is this paperwork okay to sign, to how should I think strategically about choosing a business manager. We're there with the artist the entire way. And so, now we can get into it. Let's see. Okay, so what are we covering today? Today, I really want to focus on music distribution. And for me, that kind of breaks down into three broad categories of thinking and steps. First is the different methods of getting your music out into the world. Are you going to self-release? Are you going to do a label release? Are you going to get funding? What are you going to do? That's a big piece of the puzzle. The second piece of the puzzle related to that is, given the choice you've made on that first question, what are the business models and contracts that you should be well versed in, so that you can actually execute your strategy correctly? And the very, very important last step is how to collect the money your music makes. So we're going to do a quick overview on point one. And then really the focus today, as you can tell by the bold, is we're going to focus really on those contracts and paperwork, because the reality of the world is there's a huge gap between when you are going to have a lot of deals in the pipeline that you want to make sure you're not getting screwed over. But at the same time, it might not be worth paying a lawyer $1,000 or even $500 to do the review, especially in dance music where most contracts don't come with an advance, at least not early on. And so it's really important that you at least have a little bit of knowledge, so when you get these pieces of paper, you're not totally in a panic, and also so someone can't bully you into signing something you don't understand. Because I've also seen situations where very intelligent artists know to not sign something without understanding it, but sometimes that means they never sign it and the opportunity goes away, which is also not the ideal outcome. So I really want everyone to walk away just feeling like if someone sends me a contract for a release tomorrow, I kind of know what I'm doing. So that's what we're focusing on. How to collect the money your music makes is definitely an incredibly important step as well. We'll touch a little bit on some basics and mechanics, but royalty collections are actually in and of itself a very complex topic that we can always address in a different lecture, or you can always reach out and ask specific questions about your royalty collection processes. I'll pause there. Any questions? No? All right. And so I think this is something that not everyone spends a lot of time on. I think it's very, very easy to get caught up into the what. You know, I can talk for days and days about US copyright law, why work for hires exist, what is an authorship termination right, all of this fun stuff. Why does Sound Exchange exist? What is the Mechanical Licensing Collective? But here's the thing, you guys are not going to be motivated to understand the what if you don't know the why. And I think part of this is an acknowledgement naturally, right, of the personalities that get drawn to this. You know, I know on paper, like I said, I went to USC, I went to Harvard, I was Miss Straight A Goody Two Shoes, but I was also incredibly rebellious, was incredibly anti-establishment, and my signature personality was, you cannot tell me what to do, right? And so I feel like the way to acknowledge everyone in this room and not just try to lecture you is to acknowledge that there are reasons why you're here in this room, right? And maybe not in a more traditional formal system or this and that. And I think I just want to make sure that, you know, this info is delivered in a way that it's not just someone trying to tell you this is what you need to do or you're irresponsible, because that's not the point. The point is not to make anyone feel bad, it's to educate. And so something I really want to highlight is there are three very, very important pillars in any music career: music distribution, music publishing, and live musical performances and touring. What I'm talking about is really just all the ways to make money from your music. Of course, there's things like merch, endorsements, what have you. We're not touching that right now. This is just how do you use your music to create the verticals? And these are the three pillars that are going to build your career. And here's the thing. We're only talking about music distribution today. We're barely going to touch on publishing because that is a ginormous topic that I actually think the EDM community needs more education on, but that's a whole thing. And really, when we get down to this last part, live musical performances and touring, for better or worse, I have found in my experience that most self-taught EDM or dance artists, they think this is all it is. You know, you think that all of this, not you, but just the people I've spoken with, they think this only exists so that you can get tours. In a way, that's true. If you have very strong pillars here, you obviously must have an audience, you know, you have backing, you're gonna tour well, that's a given. But really, this should be the key. Putting music out there that people listen to as a way to grab your fandom, that's the way to take financial pressure off booking. So when Boiler Room asks, hey, will you play this gig for free? You can say yes, because I make so much off my streaming royalties, I have the freedom to make this choice. You know, or for example, if you want to self-fund your own tour, if you take your distribution and publishing seriously, you will be able to fund your own tour or start your own shows. All of these things will just start to naturally go hand in hand. And so, again, if I can leave you guys with anything today, it's that you really want to be thinking about your release strategy and fantasizing about that just as much as you fantasize about which stage at EDC you want to play, what year you'll make it to Coachella, all of that fun stuff. And so like I was getting at, I think the takeaway, and this, I've noticed this goes a long way, at least with dance music artists, is think of it as just treating your releases with the same respect as you would treat a show that you're headlining or a show that you're throwing. You know, if you're willing to take the time to learn what's market to book out a venue, location scouting, if you're down to put in the time to learn the difference between functions and Danleys and voids and what's the cabling and how do you be a talent buyer and all of that, if you have dreams of being a label head, then you can at least, you know, think about your releases and all of the business side of that as seriously as any live show. So yeah, sorry I made this earlier. But no, seriously, I hope that this can also help drive the message home, which is, you know, whether it's this or another analogy I like to use, I don't know if people here are gamers, but, you know, think of your typical PC game, right? StarCraft, World of Warcraft. You know, when you first start the game, there's only a little bit of the map that you can see. And it is not until you explore the other areas of the map that they become lit up and at your disposal. Just because you light up a new area of the map doesn't mean you explore that area of the map the entire time. And in that same regard, emphasizing release strategy and music distribution here does not mean abandon your booking strategy and then go all in on your releases and don't play shows for 5 years. That's also not what I'm saying. You know, but the point is, I want all of these areas of knowledge to be lit up so that as you think about your career, you're not overly reliant on your booking fees as the only way. I really try to challenge the notion that you don't make money off of streaming, because I want everyone to think that they could have the next viral hit. You don't need to want to be the next Ariana Grande. You don't have to want to be even the next Skrillex. Maybe you want to be a little more low-key, but that doesn't mean each and every one of you doesn't have a viral hit in you. And the strength of one viral hit could float your future kids' college tuition, I promise you, if you do things right. And so you can make money off of streaming. It is difficult, it is tedious, and yes, a track has to have a lot of momentum going for it to really make a difference, but you know, at our firm, I have many non-dance music indie artists that are seeing 100K, 150, up to $250,000 a year just from their catalog. Not from bookings, not from endorsements, just from their music being out there in the world, being listened to by their fans. Sometimes it takes 5 to 10 years to build that up, but if this is a real long-term career for you, it'll be worth it. All right. Now I'm done preaching to you about why this is important. Let me go down here. Okay. Here's actually something I want to know from everyone. Who here keeps a spreadsheet of all the music they've released into the world and they know exactly who released it and who owns it? Okay, I thought maybe one. But no, see, that's my point. If you don't have one of those, my biggest pro tip is start doing it. You might say, why am I spending 3 hours a week doing this? This is not fun. I want to make noises on my Moog. I promise you it'll make a difference, because if you're building a team, if you meet a manager is going to ask you, where's your catalog? And if you say, I don't know, that's going to be a red flag to that manager. So while not having these things doesn't mean you won't be successful, if you do these things for yourself, you just decrease the chances that someone's going to think you're too early or too messy to get involved with. Okay, so how do you get your music out into the world? I'm curious, how many people here have self-released their music before? Beautiful. Here, does anyone want to volunteer what service they use for their self-releases?
Sure, I use DistroKid.
DistroKid? All right, DistroKid's a popular one.
Yeah, DistroKid as well.
Nice, yeah. So as you can see, as I put up here, TuneCore and DistroKid tend to be the biggest winners of the popularity contest with self-releases. Has anyone here released music with a label yet? Yeah? What's your name?
My name is Josh. I've released on my own label, Big Booty Bass. I've also had releases on Bass Rush as well with Insomniac Records.
And when you did those deals, were they for an EP? Were they for a single?
For singles and compilations.
Singles and compilations. Okay, great. And has anyone here ever, and this is most likely a no, but has anyone here ever been in conversations or been a party to an exclusive recording agreement? All right, and see, a lot of that pretty much tracks with how things occur in dance music, especially if you are a developing artist. Most people are gonna start here, self-releasing. Weirdly enough, they actually will probably then jump to here, and this is actually gonna be what we focus on. But what this spectrum represents is basically the extent to which you are the label versus you're using a label. So everything over here, you're gonna be the label, whether you're self-releasing it. Another option, as you guys probably have heard the term, is a distribution deal. What a distribution deal really means is when you look at it, it's operating as a license. They're licensing your music and saying, you're giving us the right to take your music and put it across the world on all the DSPs we have relationships to. And there's two options when you do a distro deal. It's either gonna be exclusive, which is very common. If you're familiar with distribution companies like AWOL, ADA, or really any of the larger players especially, you're probably gonna be looking at things that are more exclusive. And usually what that means is they say you can only release music through us during the term. There's usually things called carve-outs, like if you wanna do certain things on the side. But basically, if you wanna put music out, you have to go through them. The less onerous option, right, because this spectrum is less red tape, all the way to the most red tape. So the less onerous option is sometimes you can get distribution companies to do deals with you where they say, okay, just everything you decide that you want us to release will be released through us. And the risk analysis is that they're basically saying, we think we're really good at this. We're not worried. You can do whatever you want with your distro kit or your TuneCore, and anything that you actually think is gonna have heat, submit it to us and we'll work the track. And so that's kind of what a distribution deal is. And in both of these settings, you're still the label. So in that sense, big terminology lesson, when people use the term self-release, they could mean any of this. And so it's always good, if you're having a conversation, you wanna seem really smart, someone can say, I self-released. You can say, oh, did you have a distro deal or did you go through TuneCore? And you will sound incredibly intelligent in your conversations. But it's also a good reminder that a lot of people will use terminology in ways where not everyone knows what they're talking about, and so getting to the substance of it is always helpful. What we're really gonna focus on, I'll touch briefly on it here, is the exclusive licensing deal. And these are really, really relevant for indie dance. Because most dance music labels that I'm guessing anyone is dreaming of releasing on is an independent dance music label, whether it's House Call Records, Night Bass, Walk On, Dead Beats, all of those are all independent dance music labels. Technically, in a sense, Insomniac releasing on that, they're also a semi-independent dance music label. I say semi because I think in the EDM industry, they operate pretty much similar to a major, but there's really, all of the power players in dance music are gonna be issuing contracts that are kind of in these categories. And just so you know where the full spectrum can go, there is always a world in which you do a deal where someone signs you specifically as an artist. So the difference is for this, they're signing your project, right? Like your EP, your single, whatever. Here, they're signing you, the human. And it is a lot more restrictive on what you can do. And a lot of the labels actually in dance will do deals like that, but they're just a little more onerous. For example, the more kind of the labels with some longer histories, kind of those stratosphere, they might start looking at recording agreements and really looking at investing in the artist. But these are all the ways that you can get your music in the world. And as you can see, it can be overwhelming and there's a lot of options, but the key is you just need to kind of figure out what your ideal release is, and then you can go from there. And so as I was alluding to, today what we're going to deep dive into is indie dance agreements. But before I go there, I will pause quickly and see, does anyone have any questions on this? Because I know I threw a lot out there and it's, it can be a lot. Yeah.
Hi. Yeah. Hi. Yeah, I was wondering for the second single EP's label release deal. So, like for example, if you create like a group or an entity just around a particular release or project, then that would be the one you'd be pitching to try and get a deal specifically to govern that particular project, but not you as an artist, just the music.
Quick clarification. So do you mean like you create an LLC, or you mean like you create a group of producers?
Like an LLC for
Okay.
the project, but also like a collaboration, let's say, like.
That is a great question. If you have an LLC, and whether or not you should form one becomes a question of cost, because the legal answer is you should always have one, and then the practical answer is it depends if you have the money to pay for the franchise fees or just the entity maintenance fees. But yes, if you have an LLC, you should always, always, always be telling people, please use my LLC as the contracting entity. The other version of that question, if it's a track with you and 2 other producers, in one of the example contracts I have here, it's like that. Yes, you would just both need to be parties to the agreement, and you both would need to sign off on it.
But then you'd be free and independent for other things that you work on, because that.
Correct. I see what you're asking now. Yes, if you're doing one of these deals in this category, you are free and independent to do whatever you want. There are some caveats that we can actually get to in the next bit, which is there's stuff you should look out for, because they can sneak some stuff into these deals that make that not true. But if it's what it should be, correct, there should be no restrictions. Okay, awesome. All right, so like I said, all of your favorite labels in this in the EDM/underground dance music side of things, they're all going to be indie dance labels, which means everything you get is going to be an indie dance agreement. What's really good to know is norms in the dance music industry are very topsy-turvy. Kind of like what I was talking about before, you know, in dance music, there's this over-reliance on live bookings, and there's also a lack of education on a lot of the music business side of stuff, which means that the way that deals happen are really different. I think about it as EDM business practices are where hip hop was 10 years ago and where rock and roll was 30 years ago. You know, one of my bosses has been the Red Hot Chili Peppers lawyer for 30 years. And he said 30 years ago, he had to convince all the executives that these were real artists who would show up and be responsible. Now they're like the most respectable artists you could think of, and same with hip hop, we're now at a time where actually in the world of hip hop, there are very established norms on what should a producer's fee be, what should the percentage be, who are the gatekeepers, all of that. It's a lot more mature than it was 10 years ago. When 10 years ago, if someone said, hey, what's my publishing split on this? They'd probably be what are you talking about? And so just as those players and these genres grew up and developed, the same thing's gonna happen. I know a lot of people like to say the festival bubble has burst, the EDM bubble is going to burst. But, I personally don't see it. Sure, there might be slowdowns, right? Like the growth might be more like this than like that. But I think that EDM is here to stay and the business practices are going to keep developing. My big headline I wanted for that was also, don't be surprised if you go talk to your friends who are singer-songwriters or who are pop artists and you tell them the deals you're doing and they're like, that's crazy. A, they're not wrong. Dance music is crazy. But B, also, if you listen to what everyone outside of dance music said, as a business advisor, you might never do any deals. And so one of the reasons I'm really happy to be here is so that I can actually deep dive into the actual types of agreements that will affect your careers and what you should really care about. All right, so the very, very most important thing with these deals is understanding the difference between a license and a work for hire. And even though it's going to end up operating the same, because you're going to sign this piece of paper and this third party is going to have exclusive rights to your music, the magic words make a huge difference. If something is a work for hire, I'm not going to bother to get into copyright law and statutes too much, but the point is, under US copyright law, the magic words work for hire means someone else owns your shit. Someone says, you are giving this to us as a work for hire, they're saying we exclusively own 100% of the copyright in this IP, in this case music. So be on the lookout for that, and we'll look at some sample provisions so you know how to find them. A license, on the other hand, that's temporary. Be a little careful when you look at wording, because there is such a thing as a perpetual license. And someone might convince you to sign a work for hire, and you might say, but I want a perpetual license. And they'll say, it's the same thing. And you go, okay. And you sign the work for hire. Really important thing, they're not the same thing. I'll get to why, but they're not the same thing. A license can be either forever, or it can be for a set term, 6 months, 5 months, 2 weeks after you release, whatever, how you define it. But here's the key. The reason you prefer this over this is because of this. There is a thing in America called authorship termination rights, and it's the law acknowledging that artists are wonderfully creative, but not always the most business savvy, and sign things they shouldn't sign sometimes. So the law says if you license something, even if it says forever, in about 35 years, the math gets weird, but plus minus 35, you can go cancel it. You can get your rights back. And that's why you see people like Prince. That's why you see all these big names in headlines and billboards saying XYZ superstar got their rights back. What they're doing is exercising their authorship termination rights. But the thing is, if they let the labels own their music as a work for hire, you don't get this. There's not a good reason why. That's just how the US copyright law works. And so by doing a perpetual license, you're giving yourself a chance to get a second bite of the apple and maybe get those rights back later. So I'm gonna say one thing and immediately give you a caveat. Always try to get a license, but at the same time, sometimes doing a work for hire is okay. And what I want you guys to be able to do is think for yourself when you look at a deal. If someone says, no, we have to do a work for hire, I want you to be able to know for yourself, okay, so should I still do the deal? Some other terminology. So, you know, when people talk about work for hire, you might hear them say things like, oh, they sold their masters, the label owns the masters. All of that is just talking about a work for hire deal. And so the modern question is it evil if a label tries to own your masters? I'm curious, who here thinks if a label said, I must own your masters, we don't do licenses, you would think, wow, they might be bad people? Yeah?
Depends.
Yeah. No, and that's totally valid thing to feel. It's a thing that we're seeing more and more, especially in the independent artist community. But I'm also glad to see not everyone raise their hands, because it actually is not evil if a label tries to own your masters, especially not in dance music. Here's the thing, if we step outside this genre, I might have a different answer. But the fact of the matter is there are many, many labels that offer really great opportunities that are going to tell you it has to be a work for hire. And I think when you make these decisions, right, the law is just risk. You're balancing risk. Like, you're basically risking one day I might regret letting them own this versus one day I might regret not having a night-based release. I'm not saying that they insist on work for hires. I'm actually not quite sure. That was just, but you know, balancing those considerations. And I think that, you know, I think a lot of times for an artist, sometimes taking that leap is worth it. But the really important thing is to know yourself enough to make that decision. I have 2 artists right now who are incredibly successful. They're both really wonderful, like API dance adjacent artists. One of them, I just know in her heart of hearts, she doesn't care. We've talked about it. She's like, I'm cool with work for hires. I said, are you sure? And we talked about all the reasons why and why not to do. And she said, yes, I've thought about it, and I'm here to, I want just as much exposure as possible, and I don't care that much about my catalog ownership. Let's do this. So we do the work for hires. We don't think too much about it, make sure the royalty's good, we move on. I have another artist. she's actually smaller than the work for hire artist. So it doesn't necessarily track with big or small, even though, yes, bigger artists will have a better chance of getting a license. I have an artist who's slightly smaller than the first one I described. She literally thinks it is evil to let a label own your masters. And I've talked to her about it. We've spoken very deeply, and that is where she landed on her own. And so your advisors can tell you what they think, but it's your life, you know, no one knows. I will say one really good reason for the license is eventually if you do want to have a shot at selling your catalog, which is like a 20-year later consideration, but a real thing, it's a little better to have licensed it to the label versus selling it. But, you know, you got to do what you got to do sometimes, and as long as you're aware of the risk, it's okay. Yeah, did you have a question? Oh, no. All right. And so like I said, the takeaway, always try for the license, but no, it's okay to accept a work for hire. Because I also think, by the way, I think in the music community, there's a lot of misinformation and shaming, you know? And so if someone ever comes to you and says, I can't believe you did that deal, you should say, where's yours? All right, so now we'll actually get to the fun parts. Well, we'll see if you guys think this is fun. But we're gonna go over a few different examples. All right, can you maybe just take one and pass it down? Here, like take one of each of these and pass it down. And then I can take leftovers whenever they come back around. And if we run out, let me know, but I think there's more than enough. All right, and this might be a bit boring for the video watchers, and I apologize, but once you have it, I'm just gonna give everyone like 3 minutes to just page flip. Don't feel like you have to deep dive, but you know, just like give it a little spin, and then we can dive into the first ones. Is there extras? Do you need this one? Okay, cool. All right, and so what you're looking at are 3 contracts that I actually reviewed for my clients with all sensitive information redacted, and I changed some of the numbers, and so these are fake deals. But in terms of the boilerplate you're seeing and the types of comments I made, these are real comments that I sent to people to negotiate these deals. All right. Where should we start? All right. So why don't we start with, all right. I'll pick one of these and then we can go through the anatomy of a deal. All right, I'm gonna give an example of something where it's a little more bare bones. We kind of kept it to the high level. We'll look at one where we really got in the weeds. And then the last one, I'll have you guys let me know what you think the issues are. And by the way, these are incredibly dense. They're for you to take home. The point is not necessarily for you to feel like you need to understand everything. The point is for you to be able to recognize it, right? And the reason I gave you a few options is so you can actually see the consistency across them despite being very different. The first thing you'll want to look at is it a license or a work for hire? Boom, it says it right there on the top that it's a license, which is great. But here's the thing, you don't want to just have to rely on that because someone can title something a license agreement, put in a work for hire provision. and that's totally valid. And so here, what you want to do when you really know if something's a work for hire or a license is look at the rights paragraph. You'll start to see stuff like, you know, just like they'll be saying license. If you want to control F, you can control F for the word license, see if it pops up. And what you can see here is this is an exploitation in perpetuity. So when I first, what? Which one is that? Yeah, there's a ton of them. This one. Oh, here. Sorry. Picked the one that.
Command plus.
Command plus. Oh, nice. Oh, here, we can do a whole thing. And you know, look, word of warning, guys. I know this portion might especially get a bit dry, but I promise you that it's for the greater good. All right, and so in general, the way these deals work is the first bit will be the operational clauses. It'll tell you the grant of rights, like the name of the track, your royalty. Usually the second half of your agreement is gonna be the boilerplate. And so in general, you'll probably find this within the first 3 pages of your deal always. And so something that you would spot check is you're like, okay, it's a license, I see it, it's exclusive, okay, got it. License period, great. And so, because if you have to understand all this, your eyes will probably blur. And so what I want you to know to look for is look for the license period and try to like follow the sentence till it gets there, because it's long sometimes. But here, where we can quickly see that this is a perpetual license. When this contract first came to me, this was actually, I think I'd already given initial feedback before they gave this contract. They actually said that it needed to be a work for hire. I said, no, it has to be a license. They said, fine, if it's a license, it has to be perpetual. I said, okay, fine. And you know, I went to the client, got approval, and we were good. So that's one of the first things you look for. Is it a work for hire or is it a license? And then what is the term of the license? FYI, if this wasn't a perpetual license, you know, if this was more of a standard, someone said, hey, I want to come license your track, the typical term is about 10 to 20 years. I would say the really typical term is 10 years. The label's gonna try for 20. If you settle at 15, it's okay. And if it's a really tiny, like if it's your homie's label and you know it's just going on Bandcamp, maybe just give him 5 years, you know? Like, but in general, that's the spectrum that you're dealing with. So license terms. And then another thing you'll wanna look at is the scope. So here, you'll see delivery commitment. Sorry. And then, and so you'll see, okay, here's the delivery commitment. What am I supposed to deliver? And that's the control F word, by the way. If you're trying to figure out what music does this cover, you can control F for deliver. And so here it says, the licensor shall deliver to the licensee. That's the artist will deliver to the label. And if you're ever confused, quick tip, they will define all of these people in these parentheticals. So if you're like, who the hell is the licensee? You would just control F, like a quotation mark and a big L, and you'd find it. Okay, and so it says that the delivery commitment is the master recording set out in Schedule A. Quick terminology note, the sound recording is always gonna be the master recording, the composition is going to be called the musical composition. I'm going to pause here very quickly. Who here knows about the difference between a sound recording copyright and a composition copyright? Well, okay. All right, cool. And this is actually something very unique to dance music as well, and I think it's why not a lot of artists think about publishing is most people just aren't always thinking about it being 2 things. Always think of your music as being 2 things. Whatever image you need, 2 sides of the same coin, 1 flame with 2 souls, however you want to think about it. But inside any piece of your music, there's the composition, and that relates to songwriting and publishing. And then there's the sound recording, which is called the master recording also. And that is record royalties, da-da-da. Outside of dance music, a label should only be getting your sound recording rights. The other half of your music either stays with you or a publisher, that's a whole nother discussion, but 100% of the pie, only the sound recording should go to the label. In dance music, you're gonna get arguments that are very different from that, and I will explain why shortly. But that is why here it says master. Quick pause there, because composition and sound recording is a lot. I don't want to spend too much time on it, but does anyone have a question on that?
So you're saying that. So you're saying that for dance labels, they're gonna want the publishing almost every time.
Yep, indie dance labels love getting a piece of the publishing. And when they give me their arguments why, it's actually hard for me to say they're wrong. It's actually pretty fascinating. We can actually talk about that real quick since we're on the topic. Okay, so if you talk to any lawyer who has never worked in EDM and you tell them, hey, this label wants to either get a piece of my publishing or administer the publishing exclusively, they're gonna say, don't do that deal, that's so wrong, it's unethical for labels to take a piece of publishing, the 360 days are over, etc. Once you step a foot inside the dance music world, actually most of the agreements from the bigger labels I named, the most extreme is they will actually try to get a cut of your publishing. That is something I always recommend pushing back against. I don't like them getting authorship. But what I am more okay with, and they have good arguments for, is they will get exclusive administration. And so quick reminder, what we're talking about is copyright. And the way this plays out is, let's say that you have a sync license for your track. If the label doesn't control your publishing, they're gonna come to you and say, hey, Riot Games likes your single. We cleared it at like 10K aside. MFN basis, which just means they're gonna match. And so the label's gonna get the fee for the recording side, and then they'll say you get 100% of the publishing. So let's say the fee's 10K per side, that means you get 10K for the publishing, the label's gonna get 10K and then pump out your royalties. So you'll probably just get like 50% of that 10K less, costs and expenses. If the label admins your publishing, you're not gonna get 100% of that 10K on the pub side anymore. All of that is gonna flow through the label. So that's one downside sometimes of giving them those rights. Another downside is simply deal making, right? In the world of the music business, getting a big advance on your deals can be a big thing in your financial planning. If your publishing is locked up, that means you can't get a pub deal, because there are really big players that aren't labels, looking at the major label system, will do independent publishing deals with you. So you can say, oh, I'm signed to this label, I'm published by this other publisher, and you just have more diversity in your life. And so those are some good reasons why you'd want to keep your publishing. But yes, in the indie dance world, you're gonna have to stomach the reality that for a lot of these releases, you're gonna have to let them exclusively administer your publishing for the life of copyright. The life of copyright is something I also try to really, really, really challenge. And here's the argument the label will give that is actually not so bad on why they do this. In the dance music world, most producers are bedroom producers who barely check their email, don't know how the music business runs, and don't even know that publishing exists. In order for us to be able to run a financially viable entity in the midst of this very growing economic ecosystem, we need to be able to leverage our catalog. In order to do that, we need to be able to license our music. And in order to do that, we need to be able to tell Riot Games, when Riot Games asks us, hey, do we need to go to that producer for approval? The label has to be able to say, no, we got this. And here's the give and take. I know a lot of labels who do it and achieve results. You know, a couple of the really big dance music labels who you'll always see having placements with Valorant and Riot Games and stuff like that, they can move quickly because they have all these rights. And so as long as you feel like the label's actually going to do something with these publishing rights, you know, if they're like, we need it for licensing, you look at their business and they actually do it, it's okay. You know, not like, obviously I would rather not, but it makes sense, it's not evil, it's okay. What you shouldn't do is let your homie's label or someone who's not going to do something with the publishing lock up your publishing. So whether or not it can come out of your deal, you're not going to really know. And we'll look at a co-pub in a second, actually. But it's good for you to see if it's in there. And usually the sections on that will be like, here, let me find it. That was royalties, accounting. Here, so this one had it, co-publishing. And here's the tricky thing. If you looked at the very first page right up here, this says license agreement. This does not say license agreement and co-publishing agreement. And so that's why you need to really make sure you're reading these. And so paragraph 8, co-publishing. Let's see. So in this one, the label is getting a cut of the publishing. They're getting 40% of the composition, and they're getting exclusive administration. And again, back to the central message, whether that's bad or good depends on you, right? Like, let's say you're an artist that's like, I think this is awful, how dare you, like on principle. And then the label asks you, okay, how are you administering your publishing then? And you go, I don't know. You're justifying this response. So the more that you as talent can equip yourself with knowledge and up your own business practices, the more you can argue that this is not okay. But unless and until the artist teams also, you know, clean up their end of the street, the labels are going to continue to be justified to grab for more and more. So that's the publishing part. Back to a little more of the bare bones, or not bare bones, kind of the fundamentals. Obviously, the next thing you guys are going to be really interested, right, is what's my royalty? And if I have a couple points on this. First of all, most things in the indie dance world are going to operate on something called net receipts. Very quickly, the other option is called PPD, price per dealer. And this is why I said royalty collection is a whole other talk that makes your eyes cross and your head hurt, because whether or not something's expressed as PPD or net receipts can change things. Don't have to get into it. The point is, this is how most of your royalties are going to get expressed, especially in the indie world. And so there's two things you want to look at, but most people only look at one. The first thing is, what's the percentage? And the second is, what the hell is net receipts, right? If someone's like, you're getting 50% of net receipts, your second question should always be, and how are we defining that, sir? Because someone could literally put in this contract if they wanted, like, net receipts is 0. No one does that. But just like technically, someone could have in here, the definition of net receipts is $0. And then you're just getting 50% of 0. So you always want to also look at the definition of net receipts, which I think is somewhere in here. And the key with net receipts, it's always going to be a really long thing. But luckily, if anyone here has ever had to sell tickets to their own show, you kind of get the math, right? You take the gross, you minus the expenses, and you see what you get. And what you really want to pay attention to is all of these Romanettes when you're reading it, right? Because these are all the things they can take out. The things that I usually try to not let them do is, like for example, this. If I was redlining this, I would say, what do you mean not to exceed 15%? Does that mean like it changes? Like what is this? Like I would want that to be settled. You know, something that's really good here is the fact that it says direct out of pocket documented. And really the spirit of this, as you're looking at what should come out, is what would you be really mad about that your label charged to your account? You know, like for example, sometimes I like to clarify personnel costs are not part of this. Like, yo, if your A&R is taking Uber Blacks everywhere at your gig, like that doesn't come out of your royalty. And if you're not careful, those things can. And the thing is, the reason this is important is because this is where labels can get very sneaky, and if they allow enough costs to be deducted, you will never get a royalty. And so it's really important to, you know, you don't have to be your own accountant, you don't have to like know every little thing, but if there's a line item in there where you're like, wait, that's weird, ask about it, clarify. So your royalties, going back to the first part, which is percentage, I always prefer my artists to get 50%. And the more like grassroots a label is, the more kind of equal. They'll do 50-50, call it a day. That's pretty much fine, depending who you are. With bigger labels that view themselves as investing into you, you're going to be looking at more like 25 to 30%. I encourage you to negotiate that number, but don't be surprised if they force you to take that. I would never take anything less than 25 unless, I don't know, you just really like these people and want them to put your music out. You know, look, anyone can do what they want, but I would say anywhere between 30 to 50% is where you want to settle. Royalty accounting, that's kind of boring. Approvals, videos, and artwork. And so a quick note also on advances, because similar to the concept of publishing, the concept of advances operate really differently in dance in that they don't exist. And the fact that it's so accepted that advances are not given at all in dance music is interesting. I think it will change in a bit. You know, in the non-EDM world, you see people getting tracks signed and getting like 5K advances, you know, or people get their tracks, like their EP signed and they get a 5K advance for something that's not good, you know, versus in dance music, you can have an artist with like a ton of heat and they're looking at a 2K recording fund and the label says that can't be an in-pocket advance and it's a whole thing. So for better or worse, you can't really expect to be getting an advance out of these deals. But it's always something good to ask for. And if your indie singer-songwriter friends are like, why didn't you get an advance? Just tell them dance music is different. So those are all of the financial concepts. Any questions?
Yeah, I did have one when you were going over the example of publishing, when that was in there. I was just curious, have you ever had a situation where something was added to a contract that was not necessarily part of the overall conversations that artists had?
Oh, yeah.
And can you argue that maybe to get out of the contract on that basis that, like, for example, they snuck the publishing in there, it was not discussed, but the language was put into the contract?
That is a great question. It's a philosophical question many of us business advisors and lawyers ask ourselves. And it kind of depends on the relationship, because, let me answer this the right way. There's two options when you see that in the contract. One, moral outrage. Two, you can say, nice try, but let's tweak it. If you go the moral outrage route, that is a great way to get out of the deal, yes. If you told a label, yeah, I'll release with you, and then a week later you're like, God, their music is really bad, I'm embarrassed to be associated, why did I say that? And then they send you a crazy document, and you need to save face, and you see something like that, absolutely use that as an out. And then you don't have to tell them you don't like them anymore, and you have a good excuse. And you don't have to, and you can frame it very professionally too. You don't have to be morally outraged. You can just say, hey, like, I see there's some provisions in here that are more than what we talked about. I don't think I can do this deal structure. Let's circle back at the next opportunity. Or you can say, fuck you, whichever one you want to do. And so it's tough. I will say, as the lawyer, we always want to fight for our clients. And so my inclination is always, why the hell is there publishing in here? And then usually I'll talk to the manager and they'll go, the artist really wants to do this deal. We like the A&R team. They have a bunch of sync licenses in the pipeline. And I'll go, okay, fine, we'll do it. But it is tough because there's also different norms. For example, actually good to know because dance music is global. I'm sure a lot of you love European and UK labels. Those will have less messed up stuff in them secretly. Like the deal terms they present to you might still be bad. They might be like 10% royalty, who knows? But when you get the contract, it's more likely that it says exactly what it needs to say and no more, especially UK contracts. US contracts are when you gotta be really careful because there's much less etiquette here on being polite.
If someone were to sign with a UK label, the laws in the UK, I'm sure, are much different than here. Would you have to get an attorney in the UK, or would you get one here? How does that work?
The formal answer is yes. When you have a contract that's subject to a foreign jurisdiction, even if it's New York or another country, formally my answer is you should have a lawyer of that jurisdiction review. My more practical answer is find yourself a lawyer who knows all the things that you know you're gonna do. For me, when I take meetings with my clients, I say I can do UK contracts, Asian contracts, and US contracts. And that is something that makes my client really happy. If there was a point where my client was like, I'm doing a UK specific strategy and now 90% of my deals are gonna be UK, I might be like, okay, you gotta go find a UK lawyer, both for my bandwidth and for so that they're taken care of. But I think if you already are looking for a long-term lawyer and you know you're gonna have a mixed bag, I would just try to find an attorney that's just got the right experience. But if you just have a pure UK contract, you have no lawyer and you're looking for someone to review, yeah, you can find a UK attorney. You know, I would say try to find a lawyer that has the right experience for you. You know, don't work with someone who's only ever been a rock and roll lawyer and their entire client base is in Texas and think they'll know the UK contracts, right? But if you find someone who has already represented multiple dance artists, you know, travels quite a bit, is focused a bit on Europe, they can probably do it all until they need to refer you out. All right, so we've done all the economics. I want to actually just start to let you guys page flip through stuff and like answer questions. So I'm just going to run quickly through some of the the softer obligations. I'm actually just going to throw this back on here for that. So I'm just going to run through some concepts really quick and not do the page flipping for a moment because these are all the soft obligations that you'll find throughout these various agreements that you might think you don't care about, and my clients are always like, here's the royalty, here's the license term, let us know if it's good. And I say, do you care about the other stuff? They say no, and then I ask the questions and they go, oh shit, I care. So here's some stuff to really look out for. I might gloss over neighboring rights or not, but credits. It's a small thing, but just make sure in your contract it says they have to credit you. Because here's the thing, if it's not in the contract and they release it with the wrong credits, they will literally, well, okay, not literally, you run the risk that they will ignore you. Because when an intern is very, very busy and they have to answer 10 emails a minute, and the one email they can't get to is this artist with no contractual protection for their credit trying to get you to update their credit, it's not a fun time for anyone. So I would always try, you know, you can control F the word credit, or you just like ask the person drafting, like, please make sure there's a credit provision. Pro tip, if you have a collaborator and you're the one running the document, make sure your name comes first in the ordering of credit obligations. And so that's something people don't think about too much. Approvals, most of these contracts will say that the label can get any sort of remix done and just they can do that. and maybe you just get your royalty. And, you know, depending who you are, you might say like, great, like let's say you sign to Deadbeats and you love everything they do and they can do no wrong in your eyes. Then that's good. You're like, great, take the track, do all the remixes, I don't care. Alternatively, maybe you're someone who only releases one track a year. Everything you put out into the world is a symbol of your heart, and if it was ever the wrong thing, you'd be mortified. Make sure that you get approval over remixes. Another thing to look out for, this is what I was mentioning earlier to you, is exclusivity and holdbacks. I would control F for both of those words because sometimes people use one or the other. And basically that'll be when the contract says like, you know, let's say that you sign a contract June 1st and you have a single coming out with Space Yacht, I don't know, random example, July 4th. They might have in there from June 1st, from when you sign this till when we put your music out, you're exclusive to us and you can't put anything out. And it makes sense, marketing, whatever. It's not a big deal, but you should at least know about it before you sign, right? Holdbacks are similar. Those are usually more at the back end. Think of this as like a radius clause on your releases. So holdback might say, you cannot release any new music where you're the primary artist for 3 months after your release. And so that's just something to look out for and fight with the label about. They might take a hard stance and say it absolutely has to be 3, in which case, you know, you decide. But I think especially in dance music, be careful of these because we release music fast, you know? So just be careful. And don't listen to the label that says we're not gonna enforce it. Here's what you do if a label says, don't worry about this language, we never enforce it. You say, okay, can we please acknowledge that in the contract? You know, for example, you could say, if I like don't comply with this, it's not breach of contract. Put that in the language. You can ask for these things. Don't just trust them. Re-record restrictions, those are something that are a big deal for non-dance music, and I actually think in EDM, you know, they're not really a hill to die on. The re-record restriction is the thing that made Taylor Swift's release strategy famous, her re-recorded masters. So the reason Taylor Swift, right, people like her, I did not see her deal, I'm just speaking hypothetically, but the reason that people can do things like re-record their masters and maybe flip the birdie to their label is because they might say you cannot re-record your music for 10 years. And this goes to the copyright thing. The label will always own the actual recording, but you own the publishing theoretically. So once the re-record is over, you can go re-record your tracks, remaster them, and put them out anew, a la Taylor Swift. And so that's a real reason why labels get scared. And as you can see in dance music, that's always less of an issue because writing is almost like simultaneous with the creation of the recording. You know, I know people like deadmau5, they've had composition lawsuits and stuff. So there is songwriting, there is a composition, but it's very blurry. Like, I don't really see a world in which you're gonna go recreate this beat to, I don't know. It's not as applicable, but just know to look for it. It should be 3 years and not 5. But also because we're in dance, if they say it's 5, you don't have to freak out. You're probably fine. And the last couple things that are really important to pay attention to. This is the part that's gonna make your eyes blur. I will go to this section because it's so boring, even for lawyers, but it's so important. Let me look for indemnification. Where are you? Okay, here we go. Indemnity. All right. It's not the full thing, but just, yeah, go to 18. So this is what the indemnity is. And earlier, you're going to have something called representations and warranties. Actually, let me see if I can find that. Okay, here we go. Actually, go to 8.3. This is just an example, but in contracts, there's a category of things called reps, warranties, and indemnifications. And the really big takeaway is to just remember, look carefully at what you're representing and warranting to. Control F for warrant or rep. And if anything that they're asking you to rep and warrant to is not true, that will be an issue for you. Because that goes hand in hand with the concept of indemnification. Easy way to think about it is, if any of what you're representing and warranting is not actually true and you're indemnifying the label, that means you're legally at risk for liability. The biggest place this comes in is samples. So they're gonna have you say, I represent and warrant that I have all of the rights to this track. And they might even expressly say, and I represent and warrant there are no uncleared samples. And then you're gonna indemnify the label and say, if someone sues you because this is wrong, like if someone sues you because of a clearance issue, I am responsible for all of the legal costs of that litigation. All of the attorney's fees that the label spends defending that lawsuit, if any, come out of your pocket, maybe just your royalty account, depending, but that is why it's really, really important to look at these sections. I don't expect anyone here to be able to redline reps and warranties or indemnifications. So the reason I highlight it is more that if there is a sample to be cleared, flag it to your A&R or tell them that, you know, you guys need to share responsibility for it or anything like that, because the default position of these deals is going to be if there's an uncleared sample and the label is sued, you pay all the legal costs. And so that can just be a bit of an issue. All right. I promise that was the only super boring bit we're going to spend on that. But, oh wait, I think I lost the, sorry, where's the presentation? Okay, here we go. All right, and so the very last thing that I'm going to touch on, and then we can just go to questions and all of that, is the sneaky stuff. And this is stuff that I've just, in reading all of these indie dance deals, I just keep catching these things, and they always surprise me for some reason, even though I shouldn't be surprised anymore. Social media requirements. Not a big deal. Obviously, you know, it's not like them asking you to post is like being the devil. But at the same time, it's just not that normal. It's not that normal for a label to be able to sue you for breach of contract because you did not promote the track on Instagram in accordance with your contractual timeline. Like, usually the position I say is, the reason you're signing this artist is because you respect what they've done, leave our socials alone. Why would you even do this deal with us if you think we're not gonna promote it, and go away? Sometimes that works. I actually recently did a deal where I wasn't able to get rid of it, and I was pissed, but my client was actually not. And she said, it's fine, don't worry about it. And so I backed off. And so again, this is something for you to figure out. My personal philosophy is just labels shouldn't be able to sue you for not posting on time. But also, if you're like, it's not a big deal, I'll post, do it. Merch, and then something to look for is also this legal concept called a right of first refusal. You can Google that word, just if you or Control F the word refusal, see if something pops up. Also Control F match as well, because that's worse. But what that means is they usually apply it to merch, is where I see it most, where they say, if you want to do merch through any third party, you have to come to us first. And we get 30 days to try to make a deal with you. And if we can't make a deal, then you can go to the other person. I can live with that. It's always best to get rid of it, but at least be aware it's there. What you should always try to get rid of is something called a matching right. And a matching right is when they say, okay, let's say we talked for 30 days, we couldn't make a deal, and now you made a deal with this third party. And like, let's say your deal with the third party is they're like, we'll give you a 10K advance for a 1-year exclusive merch deal. If the label has a matching right, you have to go back to the label again and say, okay, the third party said they'll do 10K on 1 year. And if the label says we'll do that deal, you have to do it with the label. And that is something us music lawyers absolutely hate. So that's something to really look out for, like things related to social media, merch, all of that. And that is your basic anatomy of an exclusive licensing deal in the dance music space. I know, deep breath, it's a lot. And everyone here has been fantastic sticking through this. But as you can see, it's a lot more than what's the track and what's your royalty. There's so many things to consider. And whether or not you want to get bogged down by it is your choice. But I think everything should always be an informed decision. And so, you know, we went through one of these together, but just so you know, the other two contracts you have, one of them is a recording exploitation and co-publishing agreement that is a work for hire, grant of rights. Okay, and so really quickly, I do want us to look at one thing before I leave you, actually, because we looked at, I want you to see a work for hire paragraph. Copyright. Ah, here you go. All right. This is actually a good example because usually if you control F for the word hire or work or the phrase work for hire, you'll find the work for hire paragraph. But here, this one's actually pretty sneaky, and so I want you to see what's going on. What you want to look for is the word assign. Remember the last one said license and had license period, and just the word license was used a lot. What you want to look out for and how you know you're selling your master, the label will own the master, is you'll see words like grant, transfer, and this is the big one, assign. If an assignment is happening, you're transferring ownership. And you're transferring the entire right, title, and interest into the copyright. This means that it's not a license, and the label is going to own the master. Yeah, and that's pretty much it. Sorry, I just realized I didn't give you guys a chance to see one of those. And like I said, I'm always around to answer questions offline, or if anyone has a specific contract to review. And with that, I will open it to questions. Yes.
Circling back to what you're talking about matching, is that only regarding to merch, and is it an obligation by the label to match it, or is it just an option for them to match it?
It's an option for them to match it, and it can apply to anything. Typically, I see it either with merch and or publishing, but it will say it specifically. So it'll say like ROFR, and then it will say if you ever want to enter a third-party merchandise deal, or it will say if you ever want to enter into a third-party publishing deal. And so publishing deals and merch deals are where labels usually try to get that. And by the way, most of these labels have publishing arms. Wacom has a full publishing arm. DimMac has a full publishing arm. They just don't talk about it. So, you know, the players know about this.
If you sign a licensing deal and in the deal it doesn't mention anything about publishing, can you assume that you own 100% of the publishing then? Or?
Yes, I would read it carefully to make sure it's definitely not in there. And what I would be looking for is the provision on compositions, mechanical royalties. A label deal might still reference your publishing, but only in the sense where they say, you know, we have a mechanical license for this song so that we can release it. That's always going to be fine. But yes, if they don't say we get an interest in the composition, yeah, you should be good.
I was thinking about like the Taylor Swift example, and I thought that was curious because when she signed her original contract, she was like 17 or something like that back in like in 06 or 05 or something like that, and The reason I think she was able to pull off doing the whole re-recording and re-releasing is because people shifted away from buying physical music to streaming. So that rather than have to purchase those albums individually, they can just stream her new versions. So and then that was kind of, I guess, a hole in the contract world that like labels didn't consider back then that now exposed itself.
Yeah.
So I wonder, like, as attorneys, are there like things like that, like where you're thinking like 5 years into the future about like how people consume music, how it's changing, and then therefore how it
Absolutely.
affects like the law and contracts and these terms and stuff like that?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm actually really glad you asked that because it allows me to bring up the topic of AI, which, you know, is a huge thing right now, but was not as relevant to this. Yes. So something that a lot of music attorneys are doing in the absence of clear direction from statutes on how we're dealing with deep fakes is we have started to incorporate new standard language. And it's funny because I saw it in one agreement and then I saw it in 10 and now we're doing it where we say like you are not allowed to use any of these intellectual property materials for machine learning. You are not allowed to do sound alikes, you can't replicate, and you know, we're definitely trying to think ahead about where AI is going to be and what it could do to artists and put protective terms in now to guard against it. So yes, absolutely.
So follow up on an earlier question, you were talking about releasing with LLC, like within an LLC. If you can, I guess, explain more on that, because I was under the impression for like ASCAP or BMI, you had to release under your you had to put your real name in
That
order
is
to get your
correct.
royalties.
That's correct.
So how does that, the benefit of having an LLC other than, you know?
Yeah, a couple parts to that question.
And I have
The
a follow-up
first
as
is overall, like the cost of an LLC, frankly, is you're gonna look at about an $800 setup cost and about $500 a year maintenance if it's California, more if it's a foreign entity that you qualify for California. And so bearing in mind that that can be cost prohibitive, it's always a good idea to get an LLC. The biggest thing an LLC does for you is shield you from liability. There's two reasons to do this. One, people think of a lot as like, if I'm throwing shows, I should have an LLC so if someone falls, I can't get sued. Yeah, that for sure. But really more so, it's if you have an uncleared sample in your music, your LLC gets sued instead of you. And so not only are you personally protected legally, you're protected financially because only the bank accounts in the LLC's name are up for grabs, not your personal bank accounts.
So how does that work in like ASCAP BMI situation?
Great question. So publishing is a little bit funny in that publishing is always associated with who you are as a human. So even if you have an LLC, if you're signing a split letter with someone just for publishing splits, it'll have to be in personal names, and it's just a weird creature of how things have evolved. People will have publishing entities, and so what they'll do is they register with their PRO as an individual, but then they have their publishing entity or just their regular LLC, and they'll just have basically like paperwork saying like I assign all of my income from my PRO to my LLC, and so it just flows through you and ends up at your LLC.
Okay, and then yeah, I know California's $800 every year, and other states are much cheaper. Is there one you recommend?
You don't have to pay for it the first year.
All right, there you go.
They changed that back, I think, after. Yeah. I think
I
I know
guess-
they were doing it during COVID. Like they were like.
I'm pretty sure you don't have to pay the first year.
Yeah.
Happy to look into that.
Yeah.
But here, look, once you're at the superstar level, here's a quick breakdown of furnishing entity. Once you're at the superstar level, you usually have three: a touring entity, a publishing entity, and your third just regular general entity that you release music through, your label entity, whatever. When you're just starting out, you just need the one. If you're based in California and you don't think paperwork is super fun, I would just get a California LLC, call it a day. If it really gets to a point where you need to be in Delaware, because that's what the other option would be. You can be in Delaware, but you know, the benefits of being in Delaware are things like tax benefits. Some of the corporate rules are a little better. You have to be kind of making a bit of money for that to even matter. And if you are in Delaware and living in California, your costs will double, because you have to you're going to register there and then also do some like fees for the fact you're here. And so I usually tell people, look, if it's your first LLC, you live in LA, you're just trying to do something smart that doesn't break the bank, California LLC is totally fine. Use LegalZoom, totally fine. Yeah.
'Cause I have one out of state that's like $100 every year, and I just can't get over the fact of paying $800 a year. It's like,
Technically, it's illegal that you're here, and if you don't have a separate qualification to do business in California.
even if it's assigned to a second address.
Well, then that might just be fraud.
No, like it's legit, like it's for a property. It's like legitimate.
So it's not your music furnishing? I don't. Right, we're just talking
it's an LLC,
about.
But it's like made. It was like set up for a property.
Oh, then yeah, that should
So,
be
like,
fine.
Could that be used?
The formal answer from the Secretary of State would be that if you are doing business in California and your entity is registered in a different jurisdiction, you have to be qualified to do business in California with the Secretary of State, which is a separate fee and paperwork. That's the formal answer. We can talk offline a little more about your other stuff, though.
Thank you.
Once you sign your deal, what do you do? And I don't want to go too deeply into royalty collection, but I'll leave you with this. Signing the deal is not the end of the process. You got to do stuff afterwards. You got to tell people what's in the deal. You got to make sure the label pays you. The biggest thing that I would leave you with is set up your royalty account with your label. Because if you send them a fully executed and they say nothing more to you, you should not assume your royalties are going to hit. Like, you should definitely assume you need to do some sort of forms or do some sort of more stuff with your label to get your royalties paid through. Yeah. All right, well, if no one has anything else, I will leave you with that. Thank you so much for being here. And, you know, I'll have them pass around my email in case anyone has further questions.